everybody, welcome back to the Starved Rock Murders. It's been a while. It's so good to be back talking about the case, and it's good to be back with my law partner, Sally Cohen. Thank you for being here, Sally.
Thanks for having me again, Andy.
Well, I want to first start out with some exciting news. December 13th, it's a Saturday, I'm going to be giving a presentation on the Starved Rock Murders at the Grand Bear Resort in Utica. It's going to be basically a very thorough PowerPoint type analysis like I did in court, talking about the old evidence, talking about the new evidence, talking about the forensic evidence. And I really want to get into a factual discussion. So we're going to be at the Grand Bear Resort, got the ballroom rented out. I'm going to provide food, drinks, admission is free. I encourage everybody who can come on out and let's be part of this discussion. You can hear my presentation. Sally will be there too. So Saturday, December 13th, Grand Bear Resort, 1 o'clock. It'll probably last till about 3 o'clock. So check it out. I would love to see everybody there. Okay, today, Sally, I want to talk once more about a topic that, in my opinion, cannot be overstated. Cannot be overstated, and that is the Lois Zelensek telephone operator interview. This is the case. This is the case. She cracked the case wide open like a nut. And I want to dissect it even a little bit deeper with you today. Are you game for that?
Absolutely.
So let's do it this way. I want to basically, we've talked about it before, but I want to really slow it down here today. And I want to walk through the specifics and then raise a bunch of questions and things that pop out. So let me start. I want to basically I'll read a paragraph of her interview, and then we'll take a break and we'll talk about it. Then we'll read the next paragraph, okay? So let's start out. This is a typed 2-page report. Subject, Miss Lois Zelensek, dated April 20th, 1960, interviewed by Trooper Murphy and Trooper Bales, B-A-L-E-S. Okay, first paragraph. Somewhere between 6 and 8 p.m. on March 21st, 1960, when I opened my monitor key to notify the parties that their time was up, I heard the Aurora party say that they sure have a big write-up on the murder case in tonight's paper. You know, the kid has blood-stained overalls in the trunk of the car, and he's getting a little anxious to know what he's going to do with them. He's afraid he'll get caught. LaSalle party says, well, tell him to get rid of them, burn them. And then the memo says, end of conversation relating to the murder. Okay, so there's a few things with this that pop out at me that I want to talk right off the bat is she hears this March 21st. That is just 5 days after the bodies are found, okay? She's very specific about what she heard. She's got a time frame down there, and she says the murder case. And there can be no doubt, can there? There can be no doubt that she's talking about the Starved Rock murders.
No doubt to me. Absolutely not.
I mean, she's talking about the murder case, and it sounds like the Aurora party has obviously spoken to the person with the bloodstained overalls in the trunk of the car, because the Aurora party knows that that person still has the bloodstained overalls in the car and is anxious about getting caught. And the Aurora party is reporting this to the other party. So what we know is there are at least 3 people that are somehow involved. We've got the person with the bloodstained overalls, we've got the Aurora party on the phone, and we've got the LaSalle party on the phone. And they're talking about the Starved Rock murders. How is this not a nuclear bomb going off at the Illinois State Police, at the LaSalle County Sheriff's Office, LaSalle County State's Attorney's Office? How is this not a huge explosion?
Right. I mean, it's crazy. I would also just point out that they're talking about blood-stained overalls. You know who didn't have blood-stained overalls? Chester Weger. Of course, we've always known that the scene must have been horrifically bloody. They only found a tiny, minute blood spatter on Chester's clothes that couldn't even be blood typed. Meanwhile, here we've got a corroborated story of a person who has blood-stained overalls in the trunk of his car that he doesn't know what to do with, probably because there's so much blood. And I think it's also interesting that 5 days after the murder is about when you start getting nervous about what to do with them. He's been thinking on it for a little while. So to me, this is clearly about the Starved Rock murders, and I can't see it any other way.
No, and you just brought up something. It's funny. I've read this memo hundreds of times, probably. It never clicked with me, the word overalls. Okay. Mm-hmm. Chester went back to work. All right. Chester's wearing jeans and his buckskin jacket. Chester wasn't wearing overalls working at the Starved Rock Lodge in the kitchen. These are bloodstained overalls. It's not Chester's clothing. And Chester doesn't have a car, by the way. So they're just, even though to me it's so obvious, and I don't even think I need to make this point, I'll make it. This is not Chester Weger. Chester Weger's not somehow in cahoots with the people on this phone call and others. He doesn't have bloodstained overalls in a car. All that is unrelated to Chester Weger. What we know right now is it's 3 people and it's not Chester Weger. So this is my point. We know right now it's not Chester Weger. We know that. And as we go through this memo, we'll kind of continue to talk about it more, but those details about the bloodstained overalls in the trunk of the car and the guy being anxious about getting caught are so important. Let's go to paragraph 2. In further conversation, which I didn't listen very closely to, I gathered the impression that the LaSalle party was an auto dealer. They were talking about a business deal pertaining to cars, and the LaSalle party said he had the money to go ahead with the deal. It gave me the impression that it was a bigger deal than just the purchase of one car, more like the purchase of a business or business location pertaining to cars. What are your thoughts about that paragraph? What jumps out at you there?
Well, again, the level of detail is surprising. She said she wasn't listening very closely, but she was listening enough to be able to tell the difference between a mass transaction and an individual transaction for a car. And just the ease with which they transitioned from us talk about a murder to talk about car sales, to me, indicates that they were pretty comfortable with the topic of murder. Burn them. On to the next. Most, petty criminals even would not have the sort of laxity with the subject.
Oh, that you took the words right out of my mouth. This reminds me, I'm a big Sopranos fan. And there's so many times in The Sopranos where there's a phone call, Tony and other people, and it's just basically a business discussion. All right, is it done? Yeah, it's done. Is it taken care of? Yeah, it's taken care of. And that's it. It's not, if this would have been, so this implies a premeditated hit by people who are comfortable with murder, as you said. People that are comfortable talking about it. It's not a panicked picture like 3 kind of vagabonds in the canyon who somehow, decided to commit this spontaneous robbery murder and would have a phone call where it's panic, pandemonium. What are we going to do? How are we going to hide the clothes? What's going on? Are we going to get caught? There's a calmness. Like, it's when she says further conversation, for them just to switch gears and talk about the auto part, it makes me think that the purpose of the call was not even to talk about the bloody overalls in the trunk of the car. It was to talk about all this stuff. And it's such a huge point to pause right here and to say, like you note, they were comfortable talking about it. Just transition easily from the bloodstained overalls and the Starved Rock murders to these car transactions. Like, this is business to them. So it just, it's so clearly a premeditated thing. And let's talk about this. Lois Zelensek is so observant. Mm-hmm. So she says, I got the impression the LaSalle party was an auto dealer. I'm jumping ahead here, but they traced the call then, and guess what? William Palmatier is an auto dealer. We're going to come back to that. So she's spot on. Spot on. Let's go to the next paragraph. She says, I was astonished that I really couldn't concentrate on listening to the rest of the conversation. So I heard no closing remarks or names mentioned. The Aurora voice I can't forget. It was a voice that gave the impression of an uneducated person. Harsh, deep voice, no softness in it at all, limited vocabulary. No pronounced characteristics such as dis, dat, dem, no foreign or nationality traits or hillbilly tones, gave impression that might be big, burly man. Talk like a man who wouldn't care much or think about anything too deeply. Gave impression that he was reporting to the boss, not nervous or worried. What are your thoughts about that paragraph?
Well, I mean, again, here, just the level of detail is very interesting. I think it's interesting and worth noting, again, I may be skipping ahead here, but this doesn't actually seem to describe Glenn Palmatier. It seems to describe perhaps somebody else that may be known to him using a phone in his bar. What does that mean? There's a fourth person who probably knows what's going on here.
Right. You're right. The level of detail here on the voice, this is not some person that was at a bar and had a few drinks and overheard a couple people behind them talking. This is a very experienced telephone operator who has a very articulate, detailed recitation of what she heard. And said she was astonished, as she should be, and says there didn't sound nervous or worried, consistent again with this whole notion of this was not anything these guys were not used to. Like they had this was nothing for them to be, concerned about. They had been involved in stuff like this before, I'm sure. Let's go to the next paragraph. The LaSalle voice was just a natural man's voice, low, soft, sounded used to talking to people, a typical salesman voice and manner of speech. No outstanding characteristics. He seemed to be the dominant one of the two. What do you think about that paragraph?
Again, it implies a sort of organized crime sort of situation here with the dominant person with a more education sort of giving orders to the fixer or the person who would carry out or be more involved on the ground with carrying out crime. That's what it implies to me.
And here's the other thing, too. So the call, I'm jumping ahead here, but, the call was placed to William Palmatier's house in Peru, Illinois, which is near Starved Rock State Park. But the call originates from a payphone in Aurora. So putting aside who made the call, there's a guy at a bar in Aurora who's doing this, who's reporting to the boss, So why, think of how, widespread this is. This is not just some local thing confined to the Starved Rock area. There is a guy at a bar in Aurora who's having this phone call. So that also really, really stands out to me. And again, her description of the voice of the LaSalle party, salesman's voice, calm. Sounds like William Palmatier, who owned a car dealership. Let's go on to the next paragraph. Once during the conversation, the LaSalle party hesitated, told Aurora to wait a minute, as though possibly someone had come within hearing distance. Aurora party was courteous when notified of time limit. Then at completion of call, when I rang him back to collect overtime charges, he said, "Don't worry, I won't run away. This was definitely a call from a pay station in Aurora. The LaSalle number may or may not be a pay station. The LaSalle number began with a capital 5. Subsequent check with information shows that there is no capital 5. All LaSalle phone numbers are capital 3. Okay. What sticks out with you with the next paragraph?
So the first thing that sticks out would certainly be the person walking by, or it sounds like there's someone within hearing distance. If the call is being received at William Palmatier's house, who else could be there? Sounds like a wife or a child that maybe walked into a room. So they were very comfortable talking about things until somebody was within earshot. So it is a private conversation, and they're discussing nefarious details. I would not want my wife to hear it either.
This is what struck me. Think about how observant Lois Zelensek was to note that pause. She noted that pause and recounted it during her interview. Like when the party hesitated, okay? I just found that to be this incredible amount of detail to show how she was paying such close attention to this, to actually be able to recount that detail. That really stood out to me. And we're going to come back to this notion of the phone numbers. I will talk to that about it in a minute. Next paragraph. This is a longer paragraph. I was uncertain what to do after hearing this conversation. Rules of communication prohibit revealing anything overheard, yet I felt very strongly that I had just overheard something extremely important. I've thought about it over all this time and discussed it with my husband, Glenn. He said that I couldn't be sure and advised me to stay out of it. Last week, it really began bothering me. I even considered going to my priest for advice. Then finally, on Saturday, April 16th, I decided to tell my neighbor, Jim Brummel, who's an Aurora police officer. Jim told Lieutenant Vielman, and the lieutenant called me to the police station about 5 p.m. Saturday evening, where I told the lieutenant my story. The lieutenant requested that I attempt to find the phone numbers involved and that he would notify the investigating authorities. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, you got to feel for Lois Zelensek. She really was wrestling with this and had to sort of put what she knew to do in her heart against sort of the telephone operator's code of conduct. And she made a contemporaneous or more contemporaneous report to both her husband and her neighbor, all of whom viewed this with sincerity. Her neighbor, Jim Brummel, said, I'm going to immediately go to the higher authorities at the police department, who then also found it to be sincere and interviewed Lois Zelensek that evening. So you've got a bunch of people, none of whom are the direct, Illinois State Police yet. She didn't go right to the authorities or the newspaper with her account. She, slowly but surely gained the moral courage to come forward to the proper authorities and did so without fanfare. So I think that adds credibility to her narrative, certainly.
And think of this poor woman who is so conflicted. This is how seriously she takes her oath of confidentiality. I mean, she heard something about the Starved Rock murders, which, by the way, we all know was the crime of the century, national news story. This is a big, big, big deal. And she has heard this bombshell conversation. And she's still debating whether she should come forward and how conflicted she is about it. But then, like you say, going to her neighbor, the Aurora police officer, and he knows Lois Zelensek, right? He knows her to be credible. He takes it right to his lieutenant, and the lieutenant tells her to come down to the station and report it right then. I mean, it is all shaping up to be so, so credible. Let's go to the next page. I'm going to read, there's 3 short paragraphs. I'm going to read all 3 of them. On Monday the 18th, I notified Lieutenant Vielman that I had been unable to trace the numbers and asked him if he thought I should see my chief operator. He advised me to do so. On Tuesday the 19th, I called my chief operator, Miss, it's hard to read the writing there, Miss, looks like Cuirin, and made an appointment with her for Wednesday the 20th. This morning, I went in and told Miss, whatever her name is, about the conversation. She advised me that she would immediately notify the proper authorities. I feel that this is definitely related to the murders. I've lost much sleep trying to determine the right thing to do. What are your thoughts about that?
My thoughts on that section are similar. Her chief operator also agreed that this was worth violating the telephone operator's code of conduct to bring to the proper authorities, and also viewed Ms. Zelensek as with utmost sincerity. Basically, I mean, same thing as previously. You can tell that everyone viewed her report with sincerity and also viewed it as having utmost importance. I think it adds to Ms. Zelensek's credibility that she even still wrestled with it to that day. And she knew that it was about the Starved Rock murders. There was no doubt in her mind. And that's what made it so difficult to come forward with, because she knew what she had. And it was so important to her to make sure that the truth was known.
And let's pause here. So in the discussions she has had, talking about what she heard, talking with her neighbor, Jim Brummel, Aurora police officer, talking with Lieutenant Veilman at the Aurora Police Department, talking with the chief operator. Let me just be clear. There is zero discussion that maybe she got they're talking about a different murder. Oh, you're talking about the murder of the kid, in Utica who got stabbed by his roommate or, blah, blah, blah. No, they're not talking about some other murder. They're all on board that this is the Starved Rock murders. That's what you heard these guys talking about, to be clear. And they all realize how important it is and how sincere Miss Zelensek is. Let's read the next paragraph. This is a little bit longer one, too. I just think it's important to have these details so people can hear it, really hear it. Additional, this is the state troopers reporting. We then went to the business office of the telephone company in Aurora and were informed by the manager that their files had been checked today and that the slip in question is not at the office. The assistant manager's name is Larry Benson. Benson stated that since the slip is not in the Aurora office, it is most likely that the auditor's office in Harvey, Illinois. We were also informed that the only classification on these slips is by the number that the call originated from. Therefore, since we don't know the Aurora number, there may be over 100,000 slips to be looked through. The manager then called Chief Special Agent Smith, who advised us that the checking of the slips in Harvey had already begun. He will notify Lieutenant Toffant immediately. We contacted Lieutenant Boyleman at the Aurora PD and was informed that he had no additional information beyond what we had already had from Ms. Zelensek's statement. We asked Lieutenant what his opinion would be of the value of the statement since he had spoken to Ms. Zelensek on several occasions. The lieutenant advised us that he considered the statements to be most sincere and that in his opinion the reward had little or nothing to do with it. He volunteered the full cooperation of his department. And then the memo concludes, after taking this statement, we agree, this is Troopers Murphy and Bales, we agree with the lieutenant's opinion that this subject is most sincere and quite relieved to finally tell her story and get it off her mind. So, thoughts on what I just read?
Well, the thing that actually jumps out at me the most, which is a little bit of an aside here, is that they say, in his opinion, the reward money has little or nothing to do with it. And we all know who actually got the reward money in this case. Yeah. Harlan Warren, deputies Wayne Dummett and Hess. Wayne Hess and Bill Dummett. And Stephen Kinding, which we'll get to in a minute, is the polygrapher who discredited Ms. Zelensek. So I just find it to be ironic that they're even putting in here that the reward money had nothing to do with it, when the reward money seems to have influenced the investigation in a major way, in an unethical way, to those who are investigating and discrediting Ms. Zelensek. Separately, though, the people who interviewed her, so far there's been 0 people who do not view Ms. Zelensek as credible. Every single person that's spoken to her, that she's told her story to, have said, most sincere.
And just look at her. She is a telephone operator. I know from talking to her daughter, Marcia Minot, that she was president of the telephone operator union. It's her job to do this. She's good at her job. She is on the phone. She listens on the phone. She talks to people on the phone. She's spot on. You know what this reminds me of? I was just over at my 91-year-old mom's house over Thanksgiving, and it was one of these It's a Wonderful Life marathons on TV. One of my favorite movies. Seen it a bunch of times. See it every year. When Jimmy Stewart's thinking about jumping off that bridge, the little angel kind of shows him what life would be like, if he actually died, right? And it's now Potterville, and the town is totally changed, and how horrible things are. And I think about it in this context. I think about what it would be like if the real perpetrators would have been brought to justice. How would the world have been? How would Chester Weger's life have turned out? How would his kids' life have turned out? How would his family and his parents have turned out? And what would have happened, the victims' families, if the real truth came out? And how that would have all looked if the real perpetrators were brought to justice, right? Isn't that how you can think about that? And the other thing is, we're going off a detailed, almost 2-page typewritten report. This is just what the troopers wrote down. Okay. You and I have been in a lot of interviews. There's probably a lot more that didn't make it onto the written paper. And the other thing too is when you're sitting across the table from somebody and talking to them, you're sizing up their emotions, their body language, that you're looking right at the person in the eye. So there's even way more credibility to this if you would have been there in person and met her and have heard her story, And I just can't help but, note how what a fortuitous break in the case. What a fortuitous break in the case, right?
Right. I mean, it's worth mentioning again that Lois Zelensek had no reason to want to be involved and a lot of reasons not to want to be involved. And that adds to the sincerity of what she heard, because she had a lot to lose if it were to violate the telephone operator's code of conduct, or she were to be discredited publicly and sort of what wound up happening. I mean, there was no reason for her to want to be involved. There was no fame to gain. Nothing good could come to her from this. So I find that adds to her credibility as well.
So let me talk a little bit about what happens next. So they traced the call. It's from a payphone at this tavern in Aurora, and the call is placed to William Palmateer's house in Peru, Illinois. The bar in Aurora is owned by Glenn Palmateer, his brother. I found some newspaper articles, and I thought this really struck me. What I'm going to show you, it's a timing issue, about these brothers. And so I'm looking at a Streeter, Illinois newspaper, The Times, Wednesday, August 30th, 1960, okay? This memo is dated April 21st. So April, May, June, July, August, 4 months go by. And in this article, it's at the top says, still nothing new in Triple Slane case. And the part I've highlighted says, Assistant State's Attorney Craig Armstrong said that the suspects were not new, that their identities had been known by State's Attorney Harlan Warren and state police since shortly after the Slanes in March. What? So why are they not being interviewed until late August 30th? Right. What has happened the last 4 months? Armstrong said that their identities had been known. So why does it take all that time to interview these guys? And here's the other thing. We know that Glenn Palmateer got interviewed, and we've got a transcript of that interview. And by the way, to remind people, the only reason I got that document is because Steve Stout donated a bunch of documents to the LaSalle Historical Society anonymously. I found out, I got a tip that the documents were there. I would have never known. Those documents would have just been buried on a shelf. I would have never had access to them. I would have never seen this Glenn Palmateer interview, which we're going to talk about next. And as part of those Steve Stout documents, there was an index of interviews, and it noted there was an interview of William Palmateer that's missing. Mm-hmm. Where's the William Palmateer interview? Because you know what? Glenn Palmateer, like you say, based on the way Lois Zelensek describes the voice, it may not be him. It's somebody in the bar that knows him. But William Palmateer has no excuse. William Palmateer has been caught red-handed with his hand in the cookie jar. The call's traced to his house. His house. Okay? So all the newspaper articles just quote him as saying is he denies it. He just denies it. Flat out denies it. Well, you know what? That's a lie. That's a fucking lie. Plain and simple, that is a lie. Period. So let's talk about what happens next. So they trace the call, and let's talk about the Glenn Palmateer interview. It doesn't happen until August 30th.
Well, I mean, even before we get there, I think as you read in the last 3 paragraphs of the memo, they went through hundreds of thousands of slips, and then they traced the call. I mean, so this shows that they did, for some period of time, they didn't just dismiss Ms. Zelensek's report as being untrustworthy or she's making it up or she wants notoriety. They took the follow-on steps that one would take if they received a credible report like this. They traced the call, they went through all this effort, and they said, when we find it, we will notify you immediately. It was of urgency to them.
Yes. Think of all the work that took, and it was the Illinois State Police initially that's involved. We'll have to note that at starting out. So this statement of Glenn Palmatier, it takes place Tuesday, August 30th, 1960. And it's conducted by Craig Armstrong, who's a LaSalle County State's Attorney. And there are some other Illinois State troopers there, including Trooper Murphy. And there's a court reporter. So I would first note that it's short. This is short. This looks like it's maybe, I don't even know if it's a half hour, as opposed to asking this person 1,000 questions, right? It is short. It is not the kind of interview where you are like a pit bull going to find out everything you can. It's more like a softball interview. And so what's interesting is Craig Armstrong has provided the Glenn Palmatier and his lawyer who's present in advance with the memo. Why would you do that? Why would you let them read it? Why would you educate them about what you've got instead of just interviewing them, like saying, I got some questions for you? That's the first thing that stood out for me. But right away, they ask him about making a call on March 21st at 9:15 p.m. And he says, I make many calls to that number. That's my brother's home telephone. I believe that date was the time I called him on a 76-year-old lady that had a car and wasn't driven very much. And he's basically making like a story that he called his brother about this old lady who wanted to sell a car, okay? And then they ask him, do you ever recall talking about the triple murders that occurred at Starved Rock State Park? He says, at one time, maybe. I don't know. I know shortly it was after it or something because Bill lived down there and I asked him about it. Then it's kind of cut off. The next page says paper on it. I'm not sure if they're talking about the newspaper. So he's now admitted that he had talked to his brother about the murders and on that date had maybe talked to his brother about cars. What is your thoughts on all that?
Right. I mean, this reads certainly like somebody got a hold of the Zelensek memo before they were interviewed because he's so specific. First of all, as you note, the interview takes place 4 months after the call was made. Who remembers by date, make, model, and price the car they were discussing 5 months earlier with their brother, who's a car salesman who he says he talks to 5 times a day. And he just happens to remember what call was being made right then at that time. And he's also accounting for the fact that, oh yeah, maybe we did talk about the write-up in the papers, but not about any bloody overalls. He's sort of hedging in case they hear something different from William, I guess. But it certainly is a little too detailed in his description of what they were discussing 5 months earlier at this time on this call about this little old lady and the car. It's too much.
Totally too much. And they ask him about the bloodstained overalls part. He says that was no conversation of mine. And then I'm just flipping through the pages. There's really not much to this. They note, Armstrong notes, you called your brother twice on the 13th. So that is the day before the murders. Once on the 15th, that's the day after the murders. Once on the 18th, once on the 21st, and you called his home on the 30th. Okay. And then Glenn Palmatier responds, I call him a lot of times. And then guess what? I love this. Then this is Armstrong says this. I think that's all I want to ask. Trooper Murphy, can you believe that? You've got, I mean, this isn't some, the paint store, somebody robbed a gallon of paint from the counter. We're going to ask the little kid down the block, did he take it? This is a triple murder of 3 prominent women, crime of the century. You've got this bombshell tip, and that's it?
Right.
Those are your questions?
Well, and
I didn't leave anything out.
That, the questions read as though it is Glenn Palmatier's lawyer in front of the jury asking leading questions to make him look innocent.
Yeah.
So anyone could have called that number and said that? Yeah.
Yeah, right. And I'm going to get to the part where they turn it over to Trooper Murphy, but that's Craig Armstrong goes first, the state's attorney, and that's his questions. And he's the guy, by the way, who's quoted in the newspaper articles the next day as saying, it's 1,000 to 1 shot that these brothers had anything to do with it. 1,000 to 1 shot. That just shows you that something is going down here. But can you believe you wouldn't have a million other questions? Like, who else is in the bar? Who else are you hanging out with? Who else calls your brother? What did you say to your brother? Like, you'd have a million questions for this guy. On and on and on. You basically would question him until he just stopped talking, you know? Oh my gosh, I could not believe it when that was all Craig Armstrong asked. So me, the jig was up right then. This was not a legitimate, oh, we're going to get to the truth kind of interview. It's like, let's do an interview so we can remove you as a suspect kind of interview. So then they turn it over to Trooper Murphy. Okay, now I think it's the same one who interviewed Lois Zelensek. And he starts out with some other topics. So his first question out of the box, which is interesting, he says on March 15th, which is the day after the murders, the day before the bodies are found. He says on March 15th, Mr. Palmatier, a telephone call was made from the telephone located on the wall of your tavern, a person-to-person call to the Iowa State Penitentiary at Fort Madison, Iowa. And then Glenn Palmatier says, who would that be? And Trooper Murphy says, the name is Eddie O'Connor. Do you have any knowledge of this call? And Palmatier says, no, I have no knowledge of that. And then he says, do you know Eddie Neil O'Connor? And Palmatier says, I never heard him. So let's pause. What's going on here? Why is Murphy asking him about this call to Eddie O'Connor at the Iowa State Penitentiary? Isn't that odd?
Certainly is odd.
I mean, there's some connection there of some sort, they thought. And then they ask Palmatier, Trooper Murphy, are you familiar with the people and a house located at 200 Commonwealth Avenue in Aurora? He says, no, I don't know anything about that. So what's up with that? Mm-hmm. What's up with the house 200 Commonwealth Avenue in Aurora that it's so important that Trooper Murphy's asking Glenn Palmatier about that? What do you think?
Well, again, the way that he moves from one topic to another, it does almost read as a checklist of questions that we got to ask, that we're going to accept whatever the answer is. But certainly, they have something to go on there that is relevant to them, that they're asking either to clear him on it or to see if maybe he'll stumble or admit to something or some knowledge of these people or these addresses. But certainly they have done investigation into this. As we'll see later, there's more. They've
done investigation. Murphy's pressing a little bit more than Craig Armstrong, but I will argue at the end, he didn't press very much, but he did press a little more. So then he now asks Glenn Palmatier about a third topic. He says, do you know a man known as the Chief, whose real name is Lupe Cardenas? And he says, he tells Palmatier, my partner and I have spent many hours sitting in your tavern, okay, at your bar, and we've observed you speaking to Lupe Cardenas, also called the Chief. He's an ex-convict and known hoodlum. Are you aware of that? And Glenn Palmatier says, I'm aware of nothing. Then his fiancée, Emily Swanson's in the transcript. She says, there's the Chief that comes in. And then Glenn says, a great big burly Indian chief. And Murphy says, yes. And Glenn says, he comes in every day. And then Trooper Murphy says, do you know he's connected with gambling? And Palmatier says, he is? I don't know nothing about it. So now they've pivoted to this Lupe Cardenas part. And he denies knowing it. But they've been doing surveillance in the bar. And they see him coming in every day. And then there's a couple more pages of nothing. And then Murphy says, that's all I have.
Well, there's two parts that I think are interesting right there from what you read. Number one is great big burly Indian chief. There's that word burly again. He matches it directly with what Lois Zelensek said. Number two is that I don't know nothing about it. The only thing I know is he works for my brother.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Who might have been on the phone talking to your brother then about car transactions rather, and the murder combined? Well, maybe it was this guy. So to me, that's an admission that it could have been him on the phone.
Well, for sure. And, I think he does say he works for my brother Elmer, which is another brother. But it's unclear. And the thing is, big burly guy sounds like the way, going back to what Lois described, as, Aurora voice I can't forget, gave the impression of an uneducated person, harsh, deep voice, limited vocabulary, gave impression might be a big, burly man. I mean, it sounds like Lupe Cardenas is the one on the phone. That's what it sounds like. Oh, and by the way, he's hooked up with gambling and criminal activity. And so that's it. That's the interview they conduct with Glenn Palmatier. Talk about a Nerf ball interview just to basically kind of check off the checklist. And then they ask him if he'll do a polygraph, and he agrees. And we know that's all a setup to exonerate him. And he winds up giving a polygraph down the road. But here's what's interesting. After that interview, there's kind of a round table the same day. We got a transcript of this. This is part of those Steve Stout documents that, again, I would have never had access to. Harlan Warren's there. Dummett is there. Hess is there. And then 5 Illinois State Troopers, including Trooper Murphy. And Murphy talks about how when they first went to Glenn's Tavern to serve a subpoena on Glenn Palmatier, he blew up and threatened he was going to sue everybody for $100,000 and was acting like a maniac. So that's who they're dealing with. And at the very end, Murphy says he did admit that he had a phone call and discussed the murders with Bill, his brother, that he raved like a maniac when they first confronted him. But at the very end, the very last page of this transcript, Trooper Donald Murphy says, "I forgot something maybe I should have put in. Glenn Palmatier said that when I was alone with him, he said he knew Mr. Murphy because he used to run an appliance store and sold Stuart Warner refrigerators, and Murphy was connected with Borg Warner or Stuart Warner. He didn't know him well, but he knew who the man was. When he read of the murders, he realized he knew one of the women's husbands." Isn't that convenient?
I mean, you can't write this stuff. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, it's also, one thing I wanted to know from the Glenn Palmatier interview, too, is just at the very tail end of it, they're trying to set up the polygraph, and they give him every opportunity to schedule it himself. They say, we'll pick you up at your house. They say, you don't have to do it today. You don't have to do it next week. We'll wait for you to have your wedding first. I mean, that is not a really good investigative technique to allow the suspect, if he's a suspect, to schedule his own polygraph at his convenience weeks in the future.
And to think that that's basically the gist of his interview, what I just read, with the highlights, when this should have been a full court press, 20 Illinois State Troopers assigned to this, tracking down every lead. They didn't ask Glenn Palmatier, hey, did you know any of the victims? Did you know their husbands? How did you hear about the murders? Who'd you talk about it with? I mean, there's a million questions you would have asked him, which were not asked him. Let me bring up a few other points in no particular order. So there was talk in this memo about there maybe being Lois Zelensek thing in a bigger card transaction at play. One of our listeners found this online, an article from September 3rd, 1960. I'll hold it up. Palmatier sells out to Austin Murphy. That the bald guy is Bill Palmatier, and he's selling Palmatier Motor Company to this guy, Austin T. Murphy. And it was this motor company was located in Peru. It's spot on with what she said. She heard him talking about some bigger transaction is what she was talking about. And so when you find out that she's spot on with the LaSalle party, as she called it, being in the car business, and William Palmatier is, and they traced the call to his house, there's no doubt that he's the guy. And here's the thing. All the things she heard, there is zero chance. Let me say this again. There is zero chance that she did not hear, oh, the guy's got bloodstained overalls in the trunk of the car. He's worried about getting caught. She heard that. 1,000%. Okay? When you see everything else she said, she heard that. So that is the case. Of course these brothers are going to deny it, right? What are they supposed to say? What do you expect them to say?
Well, I think it's interesting, though, that they deny it, of course, but then they do agree to a lie detector test. And that raises the question in my mind, why would they agree to lie detector tests? Either Glenn Palmatier knew he would pass the lie detector test because he actually wasn't the one on the phone, but he knows that it was Lupe Cardenas or whoever else in his bar. Or both he and William knew these lie detector tests were set up to clear them. And that's why they agreed to take them in the first place. If he's on there ranting and raving when the police first come around, he's given assurances. You can have your counsel. You can have your wife. You can have the memo. We'll give you a lie detector test. And off you go. That's why they would agree to it. They didn't have to agree to it. And they pitch it as they were so cooperative. Well, why would they be cooperative? They knew this was going to be buried.
And guess what? It's Harlan Warren in the LaSalle County State's Attorney's Office that facilitates this with John Reed and company in Chicago. It's not the Illinois State Police doing the polygraph exams. Isn't that interesting? Illinois State Police did all the polygraph exams up to this point.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, Harlan Warren's got his own polygraph guy, John Reed and Steve Kindig. Now these guys are doing it. And Steve Kindig, by the way, who's friends with Robert Murphy too. So one of the things I really haven't talked about much is I hired a polygraph examiner expert to review the polygraph reports of the Palmatier brothers and Lois Zelensek. Now, the brothers, of course, were found to be truthful. Lois Zelensek, the judge was wrong in what he said in his opinion, that she was found to be untruthful. That's not what was found. It was this, wiggly, washy, kind of wordy, maybe she didn't remember what she was saying kind of nonsense. Our judge barred me from using this polygraph expert in our case, which is why it didn't come up at our hearing. I really didn't talk about it much. Interestingly, as luck would have it, his name is Palmatier as well. John Palmatier, polygraph expert, 40 years in the business, gave me a report. I think I posted this way back on the podcast website a while back. I want to read you the last few paragraphs of this report from John Palmatier, who's my polygraph expert in the case, based down in Miami area, Florida. He says, Stephen Kindig was friends with Robert Murphy, the husband of Frances Murphy. Mr. Murphy, simply by being the husband of one of the victims, would have been a potential suspect who would have to be interviewed. It was improper for Mr. Kindig to be professionally involved in this case based on his relationship with Mr. Murphy, and certainly should have recused himself. That's point one. Then he says, there are also questions regarding the polygraph test of Lois Zelensek, the telephone operator, who reported hearing two male subjects discussing blood-soaked clothing and its subsequent disposal. The results of Miss Zelensek's November 29th, 1960, November 29th, okay? They don't do it till then. Polygraph exam conducted by Mr. Kindig were couched in euphemisms and terms that could only be described as innuendo as to Mrs. Zelensek's credibility. Furthermore, it is noteworthy that Mr. Kindig decided not to include in his report the questions he asked of Ms. Zelensek. After reading Mr. Kindig's report in detail, the only conclusion that can be drawn is that the results of Ms. Zelensek's polygraph examination were at best inconclusive. Okay. Now, what really strikes me is they don't give her the polygraph exam till November 29th. Chester has already, air quotes, confessed. Why are they waiting until November 29th?
Right. I mean, they're tying up loose ends of clearing everything to sort of wrap their sham case in a bow, is what it sounds like. And I think, just to clear up here for the listeners, there's a little bit of a misunderstanding about the use of polygraphs. The reason that polygraphs are not admissible in court typically is because a polygraph exam is only as good as the examiner and the interpretation of the results. So because they are subject to interpretation, they're subject to sort of manipulation through expert testimony about their results. And you can see this here. What the expert is looking at is the way that a skilled polygraph examiner can twist the results of it to say what they want it to say. It's not a true false, you're being untrue, you're not. It really takes a very distinct set of skills to ask the questions, to get a control, to ask the questions, and then to interpret the results. So you can't just put it before anybody out there. And so I think that the way that it's manipulable, and that's why it's not usually admitted in court, here shows why it wouldn't be, is because here it was manipulated. Even when it was supposed to be being used as an investigative tool, they manipulated the results away from the truth-seeking function of a polygraph.
It's an excellent point. And let me read the last paragraph of this expert report. The idea that Mr. Kindig, the polygraph examiner and friend to the husband of one of the murder victims, being allowed to collect any part of the reward offered for the arrest and conviction of a suspect in this triple homicide is not only questionable, but ethically and professionally repugnant. A reward of $5,500 in 1960, adjusted for inflation, would today be more than $55,000. As an expert, I've witnessed PhD-level experts formulate opinions that were proven patently false in matters before the federal bench for fees significantly less. Consequently, asked to believe that Mr. Kindig offered an objective opinion of Mr. Weger's credibility is not only questionable, but highly incredulous. So, the notion that the brothers passed their polygraphs and then they've got this flimsy, not even a legitimate polygraph of Lois Zelensek that happens weeks after Chester has already been arrested and confessed, okay? So if they didn't know yet, okay, why wasn't that done before Chester gets arrested? If you're really legitimately investigating Lois Zelensek in this lead, aren't you going to tie that up first, before you arrest somebody without probable cause? You're going to arrest Chester Weger without probable cause when Lois Zelensek hasn't taken her polygraph yet? Because they know it's a rigged polygraph. They know they're going to concoct. And here's the thing. Stephen Kindig has to concoct this wordy mental gymnastics of like, she might not have really remembered what she heard or blah, 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 blah. They don't do that till November 29th. So I want to go back to what I want is they knew, Sally. They all knew that the people on that phone call, which is definitely William Palmatier, somebody in that bar, either Glenn or Loopy or somebody else, and the guy with the bloody overalls in the car are the ones involved. They know that 100%, which means it's not Chester Weger. They know that. But yet, they make the Palmatier brothers evaporate. They intentionally, and this is what I want to clear up with people. This is not an investigation that, they were honest about their intentions. They just got it wrong. No, this was an intentional, devious plan to knowingly pin it on somebody that had nothing to do with the murders. They all knew that.
Yep.
That is so clear to me. And to think that got done, and it jives with the whole mafia story that one of the husbands, we believe Robert Murphy, basically hired the Chicago Mafia to, put out a hit on his wife. It's consistent with the phone call, the way it's described by Lois Zelensek. And it's consistent with who's got the power to make this all go away. Who's got the power to do that?
And who all happens to know each other? Everyone that we've mentioned seems to know each other. How does that just randomly happen? I mean, it's also worth noting the prominence. Of course, we have talked about before the prominence of the husbands, with, in particular, Robert Murphy, and his motives to perhaps want his wife dead. But also, Glenn Palmatier was the deputy liquor commissioner in the city of Aurora. No shade here, but it screams mob to me. In addition to being in a powerful position, Glenn was also the secretary to the mayor of Aurora. His brother was a candidate for sheriff. So these people, they're car salesmen and they're bar owner, but they're way more than that. They've got their tentacles and everything too. And so, you might be saying to yourself, why would Harlan Warren and Craig Armstrong and everyone else risk it for these people? Well, these people are very connected.
It shows you how big this conspiracy is. Mm-hmm. Because not only the people involved in carrying out the murders, the people on that phone call that Lois Zelensek overheard, and then there's no way, in my opinion, that the Illinois State Police, LaSalle County State's Attorney's Office, LaSalle County Sheriff's Office, who know all this, are going to think that Chester Weger had anything to do with this. They know that Lois Zelensek cracked the case. And this is the case. This is the case. And most people don't know this part about the case. Lois Zelensek should have been the hero. She should have got all the reward money. That's the way history should have been written, like it's in A Wonderful Life. There's a big party at, the church down the road from where Lois lives, celebrating, this heroic act she did in reporting what she heard and cracking this crime of the century triple murder. Instead, history got written a totally different way.
Well, and my question then remains, did they all know about this before Lois Zelensek made her report? Were they aware of the conspiracy before Lois Zelensek made the report, or when they became aware of what was involved, then they began to start to bury it? And I don't know the answer to that, whether it was a setup from the beginning. It seems as though once they realized who was involved, that's when they start scrambling to frame Chester and to do everything else. Yeah. But I don't put it past them to have known all along, given the connection between these people, that everyone knew Robert Murphy, everybody seems to have known the Palmatiers in some way or form, and the fact that they got the reward money in the end. It all seems like they might have known from the beginning.
Yeah, and that very well could be. I always kind of looked at it like once they kind of traced the call and like that maybe was done in good faith, and then it's like, oh shit, like they traced this Glenn Palmatier's bar and William Palmatier. Now the powers that be in the mafia and the connections with everybody involved put the squeeze on prominent people to make this go away.
Right.
That's the only way you can look at it, in my opinion.
But from the jump, there were signs that it was mafia. We've got the missing fingertip. We've got the staging of the bodies. We've got the fact that it certainly couldn't have been done by one person, given the injuries. We've got the time frame. It just so happens that these women go on this walk, and then boom, 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 they're killed, all three of them, in this short time window. It seems like a premeditated hit, and it seems like it has to be done by more than one person. And there's indications that seem a little organized crimey from the very beginning. So you would think that once they got something that looked like exactly what the crime scene looked like, they would have been, all systems go to that angle. But
no, for sure. And then, the thing is too, there is a newspaper article on the 40th anniversary of the Starved Rock murder. So it was from the year 2000. I think I've posted this before. And it quotes Harlan Warren as saying, basically, yeah, I first thought the Illinois State Police knew what they were doing, but they clearly didn't because they thought the Chicago Mafia was involved. Oh, really? The Illinois State Police thought the Chicago Mafia was involved? Where are those documents? I'd like to hear more about that. I'd like to see more about that. Like I didn't know that. Let's now talk about 2025. So there was a colossal cover-up in 1960. There was an egregious, colossal cover-up of the real perpetrators involved in the killing of those three women that had to involve some powerful people and a lot of people. I will argue to you right now, there was as big of a cover-up the last year or two. Let's talk about that. So all of our evidence that we presented, we've kind of go through this podcast. I think most people know a lot about it, but we had a 3-day evidentiary hearing. For people that are listening to this for the first time, go back and check out all my prior episodes. You can get lost going down all those episodes. There's talk about Lois Zelensek and what they heard with her. And so here we had a 3-day evidentiary hearing in Ottawa in court. We put on all our new evidence, and that included the Lois Zelensek evidence, her interview, etc., Palmatier brothers. So after that 3-day hearing, both sides could file written briefs to the court. So I want to read you part of Will County's brief. The Will County State's Attorney's Office was representing the state of Illinois and was opposed to our post-conviction petition and contending that Chester Weger was guilty and rejected our evidence of innocence. But this is what they said about Lois Zelensek on page 36 of their brief. Part of what they said. Notably, the police observed that Miss Zelensek had gotten the phone number wrong as it could not have been a LaSalle phone number, despite her claim that one of the parties had been from LaSalle. Okay, let's pause there. That's not true. She didn't get it wrong. They wound up tracing the call.
Right.
It doesn't even matter what, they traced the call. They figured out the call was placed from this payphone in Aurora, and they traced the call. So that's simply a non-issue to begin with. But she was referring to it as the LaSalle party. I want to read to you. I had a listener reach out to me. This is pretty stunning. This is why you need all the help you can get. It said, listening to your new YouTube, a point that was discussed regarding the Palmatier and the Zelensek memo. When Lois is referring to the Aurora party and the LaSalle party, she's referring to the central office or rate centers / wire centers. These are telecom terms. The city of Peru also utilizes the ATT / Illinois Bell LaSalle central office. The 223 / 224 exchange served telephone subscribers in both the city of LaSalle and Peru. She did not get anything wrong. If you would refer to the billing records, it would say LaSalle, and that's because the central office is where the call terminated. I used to work for AT&T and telecom for 20 plus years, and that is the type of lingo used in the business. Wow. So that explains this little nonsense issue that in her memo she's saying LaSalle instead of Peru, okay? That's the first point that Will County says. Then Will County says, according to defendant's supposition, these were two men talking about a kid worried about bloody clothes from the murder, and these two men decided to tell him to burn them. However, this was discounted as such by the Illinois State Police. What is she talking about?
That puzzled me, and I have that highlighted with a question mark in my copy as well. What does that mean? When, as we discussed at length at the top of this episode, when was anything ever discounted that she said by the Illinois State Police? Never.
No. Not in the memo. I mean, all that happens in the interview is Glenn Palmatier denies it. They don't, there's nothing where the Illinois State Police are discounting that. So that's just simply, there's no factual basis for that. And then Will County says, also, this version of events is inconsistent with Roy Tyson's smoky tale. Well, I take issue with that too, because Roy Tyson said a lot of things. But one of the things I thought was most corroborating was in his story that he told me, which is before I learned of all this, that Smokey Rona told him he had bloody clothes in the trunk of a car. Okay? That jives spot on with what Lois Zelensek heard. And then Roy Tyson also told me this weird little fact that I don't think you would make up, that he wasn't sure what to do with them originally. He wasn't sure. He still had the bloody overalls the bloody clothes in his car, in the trunk, and he ultimately decided to burn them, which means there was indecision and they wound up being burned. That lines up exactly with what she heard. So for Will County to say that, I just think that that's wrong. And then one more thing, they also say, this is on page 37 of the Will County brief, that story is belied by post-conviction petition exhibits 57 and 58. The polygraph examination results from the Palmatier brothers and Lois Zelensek, which showed that the brothers are being truthful and Miss Zelensek was not. Both men took polygraph exams and denied that was what the telephone operator heard and was a conversation that they had. Can you believe that the Will County State's Attorney's Office, whose job it is to seek justice and to seek the truth, to use your common sense, to look at things objectively and fairly, that's their position? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think also a point to make before for the listeners to know is that we did this exchange of briefs, but it was not in the classical sense. The proponent would go first, and then the other side would respond, and then we would get a reply. Here, it was a mutual exchange. So we had no idea what they were going to put in their brief. They had no idea what we were going to put in ours, but certainly had we known the depths of nonsense that they would sink to, we would have had amazing responses for every single thing that they put in here, but we just couldn't predict that they would go as far as to try to use our own evidence of nefarious state activity as proof that Zelensek was lying. I mean, we couldn't have predicted that they would go so far as that. So it is, to me, utter nonsense and bad faith. They knew what we put those in for. And they tried to use them for the same purpose that they were used in 1960. So to back up your point, Andy, yes, the same nonsense conspiracy that the state was setting forth in 1960 is the same one that they are still part and parcel of today, relying on a clearly unethical polygraph taken by a clearly unethical polygraph examiner with results that we have an expert saying are wrong to show that Ms. Zelensek was lying. That is, I don't know any other word for it other than bad faith.
I think Will County, the position they took was shameful on the Lois Zelensek stuff. I agree with what you said. And I want to now talk about what the court said in the court's opinion. And the court addresses this on page 23 of its opinion. I'm going to read some highlighted portions, and then you can talk about it. There was no specific mention of the Starved Rock murders. She did not know the names of the men who were speaking, and she misidentified the phone information for the LaSalle number. Let's start there. Thoughts on that?
Well, before this recording, Andy, I said to you, where do they get that whole thing about misidentifying the phone information? Because I don't see that anywhere in the memo that they're citing to. So, as you pointed out, she did not misidentify the phone number, right? So then where did the judge get this bit that he's talking about she misidentified the phone number? Just straight lifted from the state's brief with no interrogation of the underlying facts whatsoever. No quotes from the documents, no citation to the documents, no explanation of how what she said might mean she misidentified the phone number. So to me, this is beyond laziness. It is seeking to put what the state put in its brief into a court order to deny us relief. And shameful is the word for it.
And then the judge in the next sentence says, the police investigation subsequently identified the phone numbers as belonging to Glenn and William Palmatier. That's not exactly accurate either, because it's a tavern in Aurora, okay? But a subsequent polygraph examination of Zelensek concluded that she was being untruthful. That's not exactly correct either. An interview was conducted of Glenn Palmatier, who denied being involved in the phone conversation. A subsequent polygraph examination of both of the Palmatier brothers concluded they were being truthful. A subsequent polygraph test of Zelensek determined she was not being truthful during her exam. Since Zelensek does not know who the men were that were talking when she overheard the conversation, there's nothing to contradict the Palmatier brothers' claims that they were not part of the conversation. The court finds, after reviewing the exhibits, that they are not reliable. When the court evaluates these exhibits against the trial testimony, particularly the defendant's confessions and the corroborating witness testimony, the court concludes that they do not support a freestanding claim of actual innocence, are not sufficient for the court to lose confidence in the guilty verdict, and that it is not probable that they would lead to a different result. That is insane. That is just insane.
Those of you watching on YouTube can see me getting restless and rolling my eyes and gritting my teeth, because it is not only is it insane as a matter of common sense, it's insane as a matter of law. This is not the confession, the witnesses that corroborated the confession. What witnesses that corroborated the confession? You know, you're supposed to take a fresh look at the evidence. You're not supposed to. That's that. But just the statement alone, there is nothing to contradict the Palmatier brothers' claims that they were not a part of the conversation. How about the trace that goes to William Palmatier's house? Does that not contradict his claim? It's crazy to say that in the same paragraph. Really, it's like, it is so unserious. The lack of rigor is, I almost feel insulted that he's trying to pull this over us.
It's got to be, in my mind, it's got to be intentional. I mean, you're just trying to put a square peg in a round hole. You cannot. I just don't think that's like that was. I don't think that was this legal analysis. I just don't. I'm sorry, I cut you off. What else were you going to say?
I mean, I think we've talked about this exact same sort of phrase on prior episodes, but I think to point out, linking what we know from 1960 to what has happened in 2025, it's the same nonsense. It's the same, there's no there. You don't see what's right in front of you. It feels gaslighty, to use a 2025 term. It's like, are you serious? That this would not make a difference to a jury on retrial in the year 2025? Any jury with a brain, I think it would make a big difference.
And here's the thing. This is a really important point people got to understand, which the judge did not do. You have to look at our new evidence collectively. Everything together. So we are not just looking at the Starved Rock murders in the vacuum of the Lois Zelensek memo. We are also considering that there is a hair found on Miss Murphy that's got a DNA profile that's not Chester Weger. There's genetic genealogy on that hair that is linked to one of 3 local brothers who live near Starved Rock State Park. There is all this new evidence we developed from Roy Tyson and Melissa Smith and James Woods and Randy Reynolds, all these things, the pattern and practice of William Dummett, and when you look at all that collectively, you have to look at that polygraph exam in the light that's the most obvious, right? That's just so clear that this telephone call was talking about the murders. William Palmetier is the guy who says burn the clothes. He knows how this all went down. He knows who he's talking to. And the polygraph exams are a sham of all 3 people. It's all bogus. The court is supposed to use its brain and common sense in assessing the evidence in the law. And the court, unfortunately, did not do that. And it reads like a manufactured opinion where if you have to get a certain result, you have to come up with some very misconstrued and inapplicable and not apply the law, not give the facts the weight they're entitled to, the whole thing. I would argue that the cover-up in 2025 is just as big as the cover-up in 1960. Because in 2025, we've got all this new evidence. We've even got more evidence. We've got the forensic evidence. And we've got a state's attorney's job who is to seek justice, to find the truth, and a court whose job is to follow the law and to also do the right thing under the law and the facts. I don't think that the way all this evidence was looked at, I just don't think you can look at it contrary to what I'm saying.
Right.
Do you?
No, and I mean, we talked about this before, but he started from the assumption that the confession was true, and also started, as we can see in his analysis of the Zelensek memo, that every single thing that the bad actors at the state's attorney's office and John Reed Associates and Stephen Kindig did was completely by the book and the gospel truth. So both Chester's confession and all the evidence of state malfeasance, gospel truth. How can you ever make a case about a frame job inside the state's attorney's office by a polygrapher if you must take the results of the polygraph examination as true?
Yeah. How can Chester win if his confession is gospel and the polygraphs are taking it, they are gospel?
Except for the polygraphs that Chester passed. Except for those polygraphs. Every polygraph besides those.
I am not going to let this go. I'm going to keep talking about this because this is such an egregious application of the facts in the law. The way Will County chose to interpret all our evidence, including the Lois Zelensek memo, and I include in that their characterization of the Edward Bray death certificate issue that we've talked about. And then for the judge to issue this ruling in the way he did, not applying the legal standards as he should have, I will continue to stand by that. And I will continue to shout this from the mountaintops because it's something that needs to be told over and over and over again, In preparing for this podcast, it just got me so upset again, right? When you start to read all this again and start to prepare, doesn't it bring back all these same emotions?
Yes. And you know what? For some reason, I expect better of society and our government and the state in the year 2025 You know, 1960 feels like a long time ago. We know it was pre-Miranda. They were doing all sorts of stuff back then. Today, I thought that we had evolved to the point where not only would we be, granting this petition of innocence, but we would be trying to make amends for the wrongs of the past. And here, it's the exact opposite. It is clinging to what can only be described as a massive cover-up. And for what reason?
Yeah.
It really just sort of begs the questions is the wrong. It leads to the question, why? What is going on here?
Right. Why? What is going on here? What is going on here? So, any parting thoughts? I just wanted to really walk through this in a lot more detail. And I especially William Palmatier, that's the linchpin. You know, this guy received the call. This guy said, burn the clothes. He knows who did it. His interview is missing. There's nothing in my file at all talking about any investigation of this guy. He just evaporates, like I've said. So it's just really, to me, unbelievable the way the Will County State's Attorney's Office argued the case and then how the judge adopted the outlandish arguments in denying Chester's petition. And then Chester passes days later. Everybody knew he was, he only had days to live. But I will, until I take my last breath, keep advocating for Chester's innocence. And again, Saturday, December 13th, it's coming up. I'm going to be giving a presentation at the Grand Bear Resort in Utica. It's right across the street from Starved Rock State Park. You locals know it. Even if you live in the Chicago area, it's only about an hour and a half drive away. So anybody who's got an interest in the case, I'm looking for, try to reach an audience of people who want to hear about the case and may know something about the case from relatives and other things. So Grand Bear Resort in Utica, Saturday, December 13th, 1:00. I'm making it real easy. I'm going to have food, beverages. You can be comfortable. And I think everybody will really enjoy me walking through all the evidence. I hope to see you all there. I look forward to seeing you there as well, Sally. So
yes,
to be continued.
Well, and I was going to give just one more plug here. I mean, those of you who are listening to this, I assume are not skeptics, but I know that there are a lot of skeptics out there still because of the way that it's been presented by the court, by the state. If you have skeptic friends, bring them to Andy's presentation because they will not leave a skeptic. It is open and shut. Slam dunk. It's so obvious, and I don't think that any person could see Andy's presentation and not come away with the same, enraged, values that we have right now. So bring your skeptic friends.
Amen. Amen. All right, everybody. I will see you December 13th, and we'll hop on another podcast episode real soon. So thanks to everybody for listening, and thanks for your support.